by the power of Mondo. Here's your look at the Mondo Masters of the Universe. This is the He-Man 1/6 scale figure. Now you too can have the power. Mondo is proud to bring to you the first in their line of Masters of the Universe 1/6 scale figures, He-Man. Featuring over 30 points of articulation, fabric, costume elements, and a lot of accessories, this is the most powerful figure you will ever find from here to Eternia. Just before we have a look at the most powerful man in the universe, the first thing we're going to do is figure out how tall He-Man stands. I'd also like to send out a thank you to the folks over at Mondo who were nice enough to send the sample that we're having a look at in this review. Should you be in the market of picking up He-Man for yourself, some sad news though, He-Man mostly is sold out through a lot of places. It's not to say that you couldn't still source one out, but you'll probably have to search around, check around to the various online websites and see if you can spot them that way. He-Man stands 11.7 inches in height. Get a good gander at that. And that in centimeters works out to be 29.8, so almost 30 centimeters tall. Obviously, the key elements to making a successful review is by showing you guys some comparisons, and I'm sure you guys would want to see the comparison of He-Man versus his foe on Eternia, and that is Skeletor. The figures are roughly about the same height. I know what you're about to say. You're going to say, no, Skeletor is taller. If you technically factor in the hood, then yes, Skeletor is taller. If you remove actually the hood, which you can't, Skeletor is about the same height as He-Man. So Skeletor is just a little bit taller, just a little bit taller than He-Man, but the figures' bodies are roughly the same. In fact, looking at them side by side, I would be hard-pressed to see any differences between them, other than, of course, the costumes that they're wearing, and the colors, of course, of their skin. The first thing we'll have a look at for He-Man is the included display stand, which so happens to share the same look, design, and color as the one that came included with Skeletor. They are identical to one another. Still has the supporting cradle along the top, in which, of course, the figure can rest himself on top of. Still trying to place actually what the shape of the stand is supposed to be. All I know, though, is if I flip it around to the back, it seems like we've got an M. A fiery M, perhaps, indicating Mondo. That's the only guess I really have. I mean, it's only something that you really see if you flip the stand upside down. If you look at it just the right side up, I mean, it just looks like a shape, just a blobbish shape. I kind of wish that this could have simply just been a rectangular shape. First and foremost, obviously, it causes the figure not to have too much clearance when of course, the figure's standing on top of it. And then also, I think if it was just a more rectangular shape, they could have almost done like the stonework of maybe Castle Grayskull. But as it stands, as it goes right now, this is the style of stand that we get included with both He-Man and the previously looked at Skeletor. Speaking of Skeletor, Skeletor did come included with a side companion, Relay, which of course was from the He-Man Christmas special. If anybody remembers that one. A really, again, nice little included piece. Sort of a weird nod to something from the older cartoon that maybe only diehard fans would actually immediately pick up. People that also have picked up this piece for themselves would probably be looking at it thinking, I don't recognize this character. Well, you probably are feeling the exact same thing with the accessory that comes included with He-Man. This is Burby. Burby was a character that appeared in the cartoon, minus maybe necessarily for the fact it didn't have a stand in the cartoon. It was a floating creature with, of course, the tail sort of spun in the background. I mean, it's a nice recreation of some of the animation styles of Filmation. And when you look at them side by side, it's nice to, again, see that these characters, these figures are coming included with these tiny little cartoon-accurate companions. I did sort of think to myself immediately, well, why didn't He-Man come included with, like, Orko? I mean, Orko would be essentially, I guess, about the same size as Relay. But then I thought, it's probably possible that down the road, Mondo is planning something big for Orko. Probably a full cloth costume with full posability underneath all of that. If we simply just got Orko in a style like this, he would be only relegated to very simplistic articulation. Relay only had it in the head. And when it comes to Burby only has articulation in the antennas, where you can move those back and forth. Again, it's a very nice painted piece. Airbrushing of blue on the underbelly, while primarily the main body is all white and black stripes, kind of looking like a very pale bumblebee. It's a very, again, interesting looking designed character. Essentially, I could have thought, well, why wouldn't they have gone with Orko? But again, I gotta believe, Mondo's got big plans for Orko down the road. Looking at the vast amount of accessories that come included with He-Man, we'll first start with a small hand blaster. Though you don't see too often the time that He-Man actually is wielding a laser pistol, this is more something you would expect to see from the live-action He-Man movie starring Dolph Lundgren. But this is really interesting, again, take on something that, again, in full plausibility, you could display with the figure if you so wanted to. It's all been done in a black plastic with some nice little accented areas done in a dark gunmetal silver. And again, it's just a nice looking blaster to display with He-Man. The likelihood, again, of me displaying a blaster with He-Man would be slim to none, but the fact that you would get something like that is still a nice piece to include with the figure. While we're still on the topic of firing lasers, he does also come with a laser rifle, much of course larger than the pistol that we've just looked at. And it does have some additional detailing done to it with a little bit of the red. There's some red switches and knobs on the sides. Again, we spin it around on the other side there. Again, primarily all black, just with slight dustings of silver against the surface of the plastic. It's a nice welcome treat. It probably is more so, again, I feel the nod to the live-action He-Man and not necessarily the original Filmation cartoon. No. When it comes to He-Man, generally when I think He-Man, I'm thinking swords, axes, and shields, and luckily he does have quite a bit of each. Looking at the smaller sword first, just a basic broadsword, if anything, a short sword. You can see it's got some really interesting little carvings that they put to the plastic. I like that there's little chips and scratches to it. And it's a two-tone blade. In other words, there's a lighter color of silver running around the outer edge of the blade. Don't worry, it's not sharp. No, I'm just kidding. Should never kid about that. Yeah, it's not sharp, though. The hilt is done and wrapped in brown, kind of looks like it'd be wrapped in like a leather material. And it does have some nice gold added to the end of it here, or the top of the hilt, and the bottom section of it as well. It's smaller, yes. It's not the power sword, no. But the fact that he does include something, just an additional piece to some of the other accessories it comes included with, is still cool nonetheless. Another accessory to come included with the figure is He-Man's, of course, large battle axe. The battle axe itself is really nice. I wanted to bring in Skeletors for a second so that you guys can see. It does look like it shares similar aspects to it. The blades, the actual sides of the axe, seem like they are identical. The handles certainly are identical, and even like the bottom sections, though painted differently, sure, are the exact same. The only thing that's different is Skeletor's actually has the little orb on top, whereas He-Man has a continuous point, another version of the point on the bottom. He has that on the top. Other than that, though, I mean, like the axes are identical to one another, other than, again, some paint swap-outs. Skeletor is closer to more silvers and purples, while He-Man is closer to gunmetal gray, with a slight edge done again in that lighter silver color. And then the majority of it is mostly gold, with the handled section of the battle axe being wrapped in a dark black, or dark gray even. This is, again, more like it. When I'm picturing He-Man, based on the original vintage toy line, He-Man came in course included with the battle axe, so it's nice to see that Mondo would give you a battle axe for He-Man, just in a much larger size. Speaking of other things you would imagine a He-Man to come included with, Mondo does also throw in a battle shield for He-Man. Classic in its design, still sort of updated. It has more of a modern look to it than maybe the original vintage toy. I like that it does have these little opened areas, though, revealing some crimson red inside. It's got some nice coloring with the dark gunmetal gray, again mimicking that He-Man classic, that very similar classic cross look to it. And it's got some nice riveted bolts around the outer edge there. Very nicely painted. It's not a very smooth sculpt either. It's got some roughness to it as well. So it does look like something He-Man would have been holding and wielding for long and prolonged battles. If I flip it around, though, it is fully finished on both sides with those additional rivets going all the way around. Kind of a faux leather look here on the inside of the shield, as well as the strap that goes around his arm. You'll see that there's these two slots, and what are those slots for? Well, they're actually to hold the handle, as if you are sliding this onto He-Man's arm, you then are going to take this piece here, and it fits into those grooves. You just line them up like this, and you pop them in place. I don't find, actually, that they sit all that well. One thing, I guess, my biggest concern is it does sit if you push enough weight against it, if you push it in hard enough. But the thing that worries me, though, is it's very, not thin plastic, but certainly is softer plastic. I don't want to be pushing too hard down on it for the risk that I could bend, warp, or even potentially break the side struts of the handle there. I guess the best thing to probably just do is wiggle it on both sides. Apply equal and distributed weight across the whole thing and not push it down in the middle. Again, this fits around He-Man. Unfortunately, though, it doesn't seem, from what I've been able to look at, we just take the figure here and spin him around, there does not seem to be a place in which he can actually hold the shield on his back, like that. There's no clip or anything like that. I thought in one way, if this had been something that could separate, or if he had come with a second one of these where it maybe had a gap, a space in between it, that somehow you could just latch on, or heck, if it was even just like a hook, where you could just hook it onto He-Man's back. I mean, that's the look I would want to go with. And unfortunately, I can't pull that look off. I mean, there's really no way that I can see around displaying the shield on He-Man's back, which certainly, again, would be one thing I would consider doing if I wasn't putting the shield actually on his arm. So this is how you put the shield on He-Man. You're going to take the loop, the large loop on the end here, and that is actually the first thing that you're going to slide over top of his arm, just like so. And then from there, you don't have to do this as a second step. I probably should have done this as the first step. Just take a gripping hand, one of the things that comes included with the figure, open up the fingers from the palm and feed through the handle of the shield. Fit this back into place, just attach that back into the forearm. Again, I probably could have done this in two separate steps. And then from there, you're just going to attach those back into the shield. But when you are attaching it, you want to be very, very careful to distribute the weight accordingly. You don't want to be pushing right down in the middle and put too much pressure on it for fear, again, that you're going to warp, bend, or potentially break those side strut sections of the handle of the shield. Of course, like Skeletor, I think the last thing we looked at for Skeletor's accessories was the power sword, and we will look at the same thing when it comes to He-Man. A nice little added detailing that Mondo added to the bottom of the sheath is the helmet of Battle Cat. I think that's really clever the way that they've incorporated that, so that if they don't ever release a Battle Cat, and fingers crossed that they do, if they don't at least, there's a little bit of Battle Cat to go along with He-Man. The sheath is lighter in brown color, and it's been wrapped and bandaged its way around. We'll just go ahead and draw the sword out. Slides just in place like so. And like Skeletor, there is actually little clip pieces that can fit on the back of He-Man's back straps. And we'll just put that down for a second, but I want to show you guys what the power sword looks like. The one thing about the power sword, though, is it definitely has a more modern take to it. The shape and design is still classic He-Man, but they added some additional coloring to it. Gold is now present here instead of just all simply being silver. In a bit of a way, I would have hoped that the silver here, or the more gold color, would have actually been closer to being silver, so that we just had a continuation of that silver going all the way. I don't certainly want the entire sword to be all silver, because obviously this is, again, a more modern take on He-Man, of course. But if they had just made this all silver, and the sides of the sword silver, the handle, the hilt, of course, could have been still done the way that they've done it here, and even just kept the sides still intact. But if they had just made the whole thing silver, just one slight shade darker here and here versus the blade of the sword. The interesting thing about the sword, though, is if we look at the hilt, you can see at the top there's a rather interesting looking skull that's been sculpted along the top. I'll quickly bring in Skeletor so that you can see the two power swords side to side. They are identical again to one another, like the power axes, like the battle axes. If you line them up even, they are the exact same mold. The only thing that's different about them is the two different headdresses, the pieces that go on, of course, on the top of the hilts. Skeletor has the more ram horn, as you can see, the ram skull, and He-Man has just a more traditional skull. Very interesting the way that they've done that. He-Man could have, again, just had that completely omitted, but they did want to throw something a little extra to the mix and incorporate that skull to the very end of it. This doesn't bother me at all, actually, the fact that they did include that. I think, again, it's just a nice little added piece to making the power sword look a little bit more, as I said, updated. Last thing we'll look at for accessories, that's actually not true, there's one other thing, but we'll look at the hands that come included with He-Man. To come included with the 6-scale version of He-Man, you do get yourself 2 closed fists, good fighting fists. You do get yourself a couple of blaster holding hands. You'll know these ones by the fact that they have the little trigger fingers sticking out, that you can take one of the blasters. Let's go ahead and take, we'll take the pistol here. I kind of like the look of the pistol. And just kind of navigate it through like that. Just feed it in between the hands, the fingers and the palm. And like I said, you can put that trigger finger right in a perfect place to fire off the laser. Pew, pew, pew. So he does come included with that. The other thing that the figure does come included with, for at least hands, is that he currently has a pair of gripping hands, suited for, of course, holding things like the battle axe, things suited for holding, for example, the power sword. Whatever thing you fancy to display He-Man with, at least he does have the necessary hands available to do that. What seemed like an eternity on Eternia, we're finally having a look at He-Man, the figure himself. This is a modern take, pulled off quite successfully, I feel, by Mondo. You do get yourself a more realistic He-Man approach when it comes to his head sculpt. He doesn't have the grimaced face, no, but he does come also included with this one other accessory. Now, you'll remember when we had a look at Skeletor, Skeletor had a more toy-accurate head sculpt, and He-Man has the exact same as well. All you have to do is just pop the head off the ball joint. We'll just go ahead and grab a good grip of the torso here and wiggle that off. Once that's popped off the ball joint, you can just replace it with the cartoon accurate head sculpt, which looks fine, but I mean, when you look at the figure from a distance, it is a bit strange and jarring. I'm a little bit more accepting, I feel, of Skeletor. He-Man looks literally like I've taken a larger version of the toy head and literally just plunked it on top of a more realistic body. It does look, I have to admit, a bit comical. I get why they included it. It certainly does add a little bit of nostalgia to it. It's nice the fact that they do give you 2 different options for displaying He-Man. But when it's all said and done, I think much like Skeletor, I think I'd rather go more the realistic approach. But I do appreciate the fact that we do get ourselves an alternate head portrait like we did with Skeletor. Just pop the head back into place, there we go. And again, just quickly showing you the detail on both the head pieces. One is certainly more rooted in reality, and one certainly is a little bit more rooted in the original toy line. So I really am liking the head sculpt here for He-Man. Slightly longer hair going almost past his chin. It is slightly going past his chin. And he has certainly a more serious look on his face. The coloring on him is really quite nice. He's got a real dark, solid tan. That works well for He-Man. Prince Adam's a little fairer skin, so apparently the lightning and power of Grayskull tans He-Man's skin. Mondo Toys simply have done that same thing by airbrushing all around the musculature of this figure. Like with Skeletor, there's a lot of cool details done to the muscles on He-Man's body, his arms and his legs. And it certainly does aid that by having all this additional airbrushing that they've incorporated to it. Areas around the pectoral muscle area, areas around the abdominal muscles, all have been airbrushed so that those muscles stand out. Of course, you have He-Man's classic crest, slightly updated on the front of it though. And as you can see, it's been strapped all the way around to the back of his body. Again, there's still no means that I can see, at least, of displaying the shield on his back, which would be the one thing I wish the figure could have possessed. Certainly one thing also for this particular figure, the logical route and the routes that Mondo has decided to go with. Yes, in fact, we are getting ourselves a faker, which would make sense after all. If we have a He-Man, for every He-Man out there, there's a faker waiting behind the scenes, and we're going to be getting ourselves a faker as well. I mean, one thing I would certainly love to see also for a release of He-Man perhaps down the road, they could have even pulled it off for this particular figure here, is actually having chest armor that you could attach for power armor He-Man. I think that would have been also a really cool touch. Maybe that, again, maybe something that we'll get down the road, trickling down the stream of ideas that Mondo potentially sees releasing. Of course, in the meantime, like I said, we are going to be getting ourselves a faker, which pretty much will be looking a lot like He-Man here, perhaps with a different head sculpt, completely different though. Looking at the rest of He-Man's body, he's got himself some wrapped off gauntlets on the sides of his arms. Now, this almost looks like there's a communicator here on the side. I don't believe it is a communicator at all. I think it's just armor plating. He happens to have that on both sides here. Some nice additional gold that's been incorporated here as well. Some dusting, again, of that silver just on the edge of an otherwise dark gunmetal gray plate that's, again, attached to the side of his arm. Of course, he does have his loincloth. This is pulled off by using a very soft plastic material. I feel, though, when you are moving the legs, thank goodness that the legs still have full freedom to move about. You can still move them forward and back. I'm wondering over a time if this material that they've went with, if it's going to start developing wrinkles. It has a real nice faux leather look to it, and it's been stitched in the same way that it looks like it could be a very, again, it's not real leather, but you could almost imagine that He-Man's loincloth would be comprised of leather. If you flip that up, actually, one thing that's neat about this, and you could, I suppose, slide this off of He-Man's legs, although it might be a little bit more difficult to pull off such a thing. He does actually have, let me just lift this up here for a second, he does actually have a real, regular, or toy-inspired torso underneath all of that, complete with the molded-in belt. Again, to pull off such a feat, I think it involves just sliding this down. I don't want to really damage this. That's the real problem at hand. So I'm just going to leave it in place. But they did sculpt the indications, at least, of the original toy line. So again, if you did want to make use of that toy-inspired head sculpt, and you wanted and don't mind the risk of trying to remove this altogether, you could get yourself a pretty accurate, again, more realistic look of the more toy line He-Man. We'll quickly look at his belt here, which has been done very nice in gold with some silver accents to the side, these orbs of silver on either corner. Again, it's just a really nice update to his original outfit. Continue our journey down. He's got some more airbrushing done to his legs, accenting all those muscles in his legs. He does have the double hinge on the knees, which we'll talk about in a second when we look at the figure's articulation. And then, of course, we'll have a look at He-Man's boots. One thing that's nice is that they sculpted fur to his feet, or to the tops of his boots. Some of it is a little bit more caked with glue. They have just, I would imagine, just ran glue and then patched on top of it strips of faux fur. On one foot, it seems to have a little bit more freedom that you can do a little bit more to it. On this leg here, I feel like the hair has been glued straight down. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not like I'm going to be stopping picking He-Man off the shelf and feeling compelled to go ahead and do this. But it does have, like I said, this one is a little bit more squished and flattened out because it's been glued in place. The boots are very classic He-Man. Strapped here in the darker coloring against the backdrop of a lighter colored boots. And just in case, yes, you are curious, that's what the undersoles of He-Man's feet look like. He has no peg holes because, again, he doesn't really have a stand that has pegs in the first place. This particular He-Man, like I said, doesn't have peg holes on the undersides of his feet. So looking at the figure's articulation, his head rotates all the way around. It hinges up and down. He's actually got quite a high reach up. This is perfect. So again, if you want to have He-Man looking up at his power sword by the power of Grayskull, you can actually pull off such the look because the head, like I said, does move quite a bit up. You can rock it back and forth as well. He has an upper torso crunch. He does actually have two places that crunch. He has a top section here, which is its own single individual ball joint. And then down below by his waist, he's got a secondary ball joint as well, so you can move that up and down. The shoulders hinge out, and quite nice to see that they hinge out. This one's a little on the tighter side, but the arms hinge out at least a 90-degree angle, maybe just a little less than that. The arms rotate all the way around, no problems whatsoever there. He does have a swivel on the bicep, very nice for that. Hinge on the elbow. He doesn't have necessarily a swivel. He has a swivel right here, for example, but the way that they've actually done it, let me just show you what's going on here. He's got a swivel here, but then he's got a secondary swivel underneath here. Normally, I guess when you look at larger scaled figures like this, they're pulling off the same feet as smaller, say 7-inch figures. Normally, there's always a peg hinge joint right here that allows the forearm to rotate. In a way, they kind of pulled the same thing off by still giving you a hinge in the elbow, but then the swivel on the joint is actually concealed underneath the bicep. It's really clever the way they've done that. And then last and certainly not least, for his upper torso, his hands rotate all the way around, whatever hand you decide to go with, and those hands also hinge back and forth as well. We had already really addressed this on the legs. We'll quickly talk about that again now. He does have articulation on the legs, not quite a full solid splits. I don't know why you would want to necessarily display He-Man like this anyways, but he does pull off a moderate level of a splits. The legs move forward, the legs move back. Luckily, again, the material used for the loincloth is soft enough that it doesn't seem to limit moving the legs back and forth. He does have a swivel on the top cut of the thigh, right, swivels up the top right there. He does have a double hinge on the knee, very impressive that they did do that. He does also have some articulation here on the lower leg. It sort of just rotates. It's, again, probably like a peg joint that's attaching the lower calf to the bottom of his knee, allowing for a little bit of a pivot back and forth that way. His feet do move up and down, although I do find like this foot is tight. This foot isn't so much the issue. I mean, yes, you can get a rock back on the foot, which does look a bit, yes, sure, awkward, but he does have at least articulation happening. The foot doesn't so much move forward. That's one problem. The figure, of course, his foot arches backwards, which again does leave you a bit of a jarring, noticeable hinge happening on the joint. And then the feet also do rock back and forth as well. So this particular He-Man, yes, does in fact have quite a bit of an articulation going for him. He's an overall nice looking figure. Like I said, he has more modern take design to him. I really like the look of him. Again, we'll just bring in quickly Skeletor, of course, certainly the two figures I have so far from the Mondo line of Masters of the Universe. I've also seen Faker and seen a Man-at-Arms, so there's certainly a lot of cool stuff in the pipeline when it comes to Mondo's releases of the Masters of the Universe 6-scale figures. Again, I'm interested why we didn't get ourselves an Orko. I know I mentioned that in the beginning of the review already, but maybe the plan down the road is not going to be giving us so much a staction version like we have been getting with Burby and Relay, but instead we're probably going to be getting a fully articulated Skeletor. Maybe not necessarily this size, but maybe about this size, about the size of their upper torso, which will probably have full articulation, full clothing, and a whole line of accessories. That's at least the thinking mindset that I have as to maybe why Mondo necessarily didn't include an Orko with the release of He-Man here. He-Man has the power, a powerful release that is, from the folks over at Mondo. This actually is the first figure that was released under the Masters of the Universe banner for Mondo, and yet for me, this is the second figure that we've looked at with an already impressive Skeletor under my wing. Both figures turned out really well. In the same way, I guess, as the original vintage toy line, of course, that these figures are based from, they're utilizing, from what I've seen so far, the same body mold. There's nothing wrong with that at all. All the original He-Man toy line to start off with all used the same molds. In fact, they were very notorious for swapping in and out parts to create brand new characters. If Mondo goes that same route by releasing all the future Masters with the exact same body molds and just tweaking armor and tweaking different things like head sculpts and different accessories, again, I'm all right with that if it means that we're going to be continuing to get these outstanding releases. He-Man looks impressive as a modern take He-Man. I like the head sculpt. This sort of feels a bit like the early 2000 He-Man series as well. The Power Sword feels very reminiscent of the original Power Sword that he had in the cartoon, though upgraded and tweaked slightly. We don't remember the original He-Man Power Sword having a skull on the end of the hilt, but again, some creative luxuries were taken by Mondo. Successfully, again, I feel. The figure has a whole bunch of accessories. The hard part would be hard-pressed to find which accessory I would want to display him with. I mean, more 9 times out of 10, I'd be likely going with the Power Sword. That seems a given for He-Man, but to give him a battle axe, for example, the shield, or maybe even a blaster rifle or pistol, there's a lot of potential when it comes to displaying this exquisite-looking piece. Now, again, this one unfortunately is sold out, at least on Mondo's store site right now. It's not to say, again, that you can check out through various online websites. He-Man probably is still out there. It's just, again, a matter of tracking him down and adding him to your collection. If you're a big fan of He-Man, though, and in the market of 6-scale figures, this is a happy marriage of the two put together that you get some really solid-looking He-Man figures that you can put on your display shelf. Did you manage to pick up He-Man or Skeletor for yourself? If not, based on this review and this review alone, what do you guys think of the figure down below? I'd also like to send a big thank you to the folks over at Mondo who were nice enough to send this sample my way. If you guys are interested in checking out some more of Mondo's stuff that I've reviewed on this channel, feel free to check out my Mondo playlist. It'll cover not only He-Man, it will cover not only Skeletor, but it will cover off all the other things that I've looked at from Mondo in the past. So feel free to check that out if you get a bit of a chance on your hands. Speaking of time on your hands, members of the mob, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below if you haven't done so already. Turn that bell notification on if you haven't done so already. And keep your peepers peeled because there's going to be a whole lot of videos coming your way. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.